She was just a housekeeper until the most dangerous man in Chicago demanded her song. Lucia Marino had spent years cleaning penthouses for the elite, unaware of her true heritage. One lullaby later, her life changed forever. The man behind her discovery, Vincenzo Russo, didn't just see her talent, he saw her bloodline, her power, and the threat she represented. One night of singing revealed secrets that had remained buried for decades, and suddenly she was no longer invisible. Lucia believed she had been hired to clean a billionaire's mansion. She did not know Vincenzo Russo had noticed her long before she ever understood why. 6 months into scrubbing windows, floors, and silent rooms for Chicago's richest families, she stood inside his high-rise, wiping glass while softly singing the Sicilian lullaby her mother used to hum when life still felt safe. The song was not for anyone else. It was a small place to hide. Then she saw his reflection behind her. Russo moved without a sound, as if the room already belonged to him, and everyone inside it only lived there by permission. He stepped close and whispered, "You missed a spot." Lucia understood he was not talking about the window. He was testing how easily he could make her tremble. Lucia's first instinct was to shrink. She lowered her eyes, gripped the cloth tighter, and offered to stop singing, because workers like her survived by never becoming interesting to men like him. The other housekeepers had already warned her about Vincenzo Russo, the 32-year-old billionaire, whose beauty was mentioned almost as often as his cruelty. They said he changed staff without warning, fired people for breathing too loudly, and kept armed guards in places where normal people kept flowers. Lucia had stayed anyway because Matteo's medical bills left her no room for pride. But when Russo said her name slowly, tasting every syllable, something inside her tightened. He knew more than he should, and before leaving, he dropped the detail that turned her blood cold. "That song," he said, "is Sicilian." The next encounter happened in Russo's private office, a room so controlled that even the dust seemed afraid to settle there. Lucia had been told never to enter, yet the door was unlocked, the crystal decanter left in plain sight, and the silence stretched too neatly around her. It felt less like a mistake than a trap waiting to close. When Russo appeared behind her, she froze with one hand near the polished wood. She expected anger. Instead, he shut the door. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. "Sing it," he said. "Not please. Not would you. Just a command." Lucia swallowed. "I am here to clean, Mr. Russo." His eyes did not move from her face. "Tonight you are here because I asked." Lucia clutched the cleaning cloth to her chest, like it could protect her from a man who probably ordered violence with the same calm voice he used for dinner reservations. She tried to bargain. She had work to finish. She did not want trouble. Russo only smiled barely enough to change his face. Then he told her she was not afraid, as if he had the right to rename what was happening inside her body. "Do not tell me what I feel," she whispered. For the first time, his smile faded. Under his stare, she finally sang. The old lullaby came out thin at first, then steadier, carrying pieces of her mother, her childhood, and the kitchen where she once felt loved. Russo listened without moving, not know what she had just given him. She only knew the room felt different after the final note. For one brief second, Russo's expression cracked. It was not softness exactly, but something shifted behind his eyes, something old and buried. Lucia saw it before he could hide it, and that frightened her more than his coldness. A cruel man with no heart is simple to fear. A cruel man with wounds invites questions. And questions are dangerous when they make you lean closer. He asked about her family, her mother's name, her Sicilian roots. Lucia answered because the room seemed to leave no space for silence. Rosalia Marino, Sicily, old songs. As Russo adjusted the gold cufflink stamped with his family crest, she sensed he was collecting pieces of her. Later, in her cramped apartment, the walls felt thinner than before. Her instincts whispered one thing clearly: leave that house and never return. But Lucia had never been as free as she wanted to believe. Matteo's illness had already built a cage around her. One bill, one prescription, one overdue notice at a time. Russo did not have to invent her desperation. He only had to find it. That night, at 11:47, her phone rang. Marco, Russo's security chief, spoke with the dead calm of a man used to being obeyed. She was to return to the estate immediately. "This is not a request," he said. Her agency supervisor called it an opportunity. As if a rich man's obsession could be dressed up as career advancement. Lucia stood in her kitchen, looking at Mateo's medication beside the sink, and felt the trap tighten without a single hand touching her. The offer came wrapped in numbers, 3 times her normal rate. Enough to buy medicine, enough to keep the lights on, enough to make fear look selfish. At exactly 7, a dark car with tinted windows carried her away from the city streets she knew and into Russo's world of gates, guards, and long driveways swallowed by trees. When the estate rose ahead of her, it looked less like a home than a fortress, pretending to be beautiful. Marco opened the door and told her she was not there to clean. She was there to sing. Lucia almost laughed because the words were so absurd. For whom? She asked. Marco looked toward the glowing windows. For whoever Mr. Russo decides should hear you. Every marble step seemed designed to remind her who had power and who did not. Inside the ballroom, Russo's guests glittered with wealth that did not need to announce itself. Men watched her over crystal glasses. Women measured her dress, her shoes, the careful way she held her shoulders. And that knowledge burned worse than any insult. Then Russo appeared at the edge of the crowd, calm, elegant, almost bored. The thin scar on his cheek caught the light, a quiet reminder that violence in his life was not rumor. She asked him whether she ever really had a choice. He came close enough for her to smell cedar, smoke, and expensive cologne. We always have choices, he said. Some are simply more painful than others. Lucia hated how steady his voice was. He had not locked the cage. He had only made every other door hurt. The sapphire necklace arrived like a gift, but Lucia felt the truth of it the moment Russo lifted it from its case. First, he made her aware of her cheap dress, the one she had ironed twice and still felt ashamed to wear. Then he corrected her appearance with his own money. A costume, he called it. Something she would wear because tonight she represented him, not herself. He fastened the necklace at the back of her neck. His fingers brushed her skin with a tenderness that felt more dangerous than roughness. Lucia met his eyes in the mirror. You do not protect me, Vincenzo. You collect me. For a moment, the room went still. Then he leaned closer. Not collect, he whispered. Recognize. That was the first clear bargain. Her voice, her presence, her submission, in exchange for relief from the debt-crushing Mateo's life. Russo did not call it that, of course. Men like him rarely name leverage honestly. He offered to erase Mateo's medical bills as if mercy had suddenly bloomed inside him. Lucia's body understood the danger before her mind could argue with it. Her hands went cold. Her throat tightened. Yet under the fear, another feeling moved, curiosity. Why her? Why that song? Why did his eyes change when she sang? Survival sometimes begins as resistance, but it can turn into study. Lucia started trying to understand the monster, because understanding him seemed like the only way to stay alive. When she took his arm, the room saw elegance. She felt the first step into a cage. While she performed, Lucia's mind slipped away from the ballroom. She sang to the old kitchen in her memory, to her mother's hands, to the smell of coffee and rain in a home that no longer existed. Around her, the grand piano, the borrowed jewels, and the staring guests turned her into part of Russo's display. When the final note faded, the applause came too quickly, too politely. Then Russo placed a hand at the small of her back. The touch was light, but everyone saw it. He did not need to announce possession. The gesture did it for him. His praise sounded private, almost intimate, yet Lucia could feel the public meaning beneath it. He was showing them that she had value because he had decided she did. Approval from a man like him could warm you and brand you at the same time. The night changed when Salvatore Catalano approached. He was older than Russo, heavier in the face, with eyes that moved like knives under velvet manners. He looked at Lucia not as a guest enjoying music, but as a man recognizing a problem he had hoped was dead. Russo's arm tightened before she understood why. When Salvatore asked who she was, Russo answered for her. A guest. Salvatore smiled. Guests do not wear house jewels. Lucia felt the invisible current between them. 2 predators had noticed the same prey, and one of them had already decided she belonged to him. She tried to speak, but Russo's fingers pressed once against her back. The message was not spoken, but her body understood it. Russo warned her about Salvatore, without explaining enough to let her protect herself. He gave fear, then held back the map. He became the only person who seemed to know what was happening, and that made him useful even as he remained dangerous. When Sophia entered in a red dress bright enough to draw the whole room's attention, Lucia saw another side of his world. Sophia touched Russo's arm with familiar confidence, but he dismissed her as if warmth were an inconvenience. The woman smiled harder, wounded and furious beneath the polish. Lucia watched Russo cut her down without raising his voice. It should have warned her. A man who discards one person so easily may one day discard another. In that moment, Lucia was too busy being relieved that his cruelty was pointed elsewhere. Sophia insulted Lucia with the sweetness of someone trained never to look ugly in public. Russo let her speak just long enough for everyone to hear it, then destroyed her composure with one cold sentence. His hand stayed at Lucia's back the entire time, keeping her in place, making sure she witnessed the lesson. He defended her, yes, but not the way a kind man defends the vulnerable. He did it like a king, correcting a servant who had touched his property. Lucia felt both protected and trapped, and that confusion began working on her before she had words for it. When Russo led her out to the terrace, away from the music and glitter, her heart was still racing. He had made himself look like her shield. He had not let her forget he was also the lock. Outside, the night air should have helped her breathe, but armed guards stood near the garden paths, and the estate walls cut off any thought of escape. Russo seemed different under the terrace lights. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture almost tired, almost human. Lucia hated that she noticed. A man like him knew exactly when to show a crack in the armor. Too much coldness would have pushed her away. A glimpse of burden pulled her closer. Then he told her the first piece of the truth. Her family name was not just a family name. Marino meant blood, territory, betrayal, and a vanished consigliere whose disappearance had shaped a war 30 years old. Lucia listened as the old story of her life began to split open. Once he broke the ground beneath her, Russo became the only person offering something solid to stand on. Lucia tried to cling to what she knew. Her family had left Sicily for a better life. That was what her mother had told her. That was the story that made their poverty feel honest, instead of hunted. Russo shook his head and called it a useful lie. The words hit harder than she expected. If that story was false, what else about her life had been built to keep her blind? She started to ask another question, but Russo pressed a finger gently to her lips. The softness of the gesture did not hide what it meant. He decided when she spoke. He decided what was safe to know. And Matteo would be moved for protection. Lucia heard the word protection and felt the meaning underneath it. Taken, controlled, removed from everything familiar. When Lucia called it kidnapping, Russo's face hardened, not with guilt but offense, as if her fear insulted his generosity. He stepped closer, trapping her between his body and the stone balustrade. Then he said something no stranger should know. The hidden birthmark near her ribs, the one her mother had, once called proof that old blood remembers. Lucia's breath stopped. That private detail turned his knowledge into invasion. He had not just found her, he had studied her. Yet after breaking her open with fear, he brushed his knuckles along her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes burn. "Do not call it protection when every door opens only for you," she whispered. Russo's thumb paused against her skin, then survived long enough to open them yourself. The truth came in pieces sharp enough to cut. Lucia's grandmother had not simply left the old world. Her family had run from bloodshed. The Marino house had burned after Antonio Marino, her grandfather's advisor, was accused of betrayal. Russo spoke of punishment, missing heirs, and names erased from records. Lucia's knees weakened before she could stop them. Her body reacted as if it had recognized a danger. Her mind was still struggling to translate. Russo caught her by the shoulders, steady and controlled. For one terrible moment, he felt like the only thing keeping her from falling apart. He had delivered the wound, then become the hand that steadied her. Lucia should have hated him for it. Instead, she found herself leaning into the support. Under pressure, Lucia's mind ran toward ordinary things. Matteo's medication, his medical records, the old stuffed bear he still kept in a box, because illness had stolen too many normal years from him. Those details gave her something to hold, while everything larger collapsed. Russo allowed none of it to slow him down. Within minutes, she was inside a fortified car with tinted windows so dark the city disappeared behind them. When the door shut, the sound landed in her chest like a prison gate. She knew what was happening. She was being taken. Yet the questions inside her kept turning toward Russo. How long had he known? Why had he waited? What did her bloodline mean? Fear should have pushed her away from him. Instead, it made him the center of every answer she needed. Inside the dark car, Russo did not speak at first. He only traced slow circles over Lucia's palm, calming her body against her will. She hated that it worked. Then he admitted he had used her presence to provoke Salvatore Catalano. She had been bait. The word did not need to be spoken. It sat between them anyway. He explained that Salvatore feared the return of the Marino heir, because blood still mattered in old criminal territories. where maps were drawn in loyalty and murder. Lucia laughed suddenly, too sharp and too loud for the enclosed space. It was not humor. It was panic breaking through the only crack it could find. A housekeeper with overdue rent could not also be the lost heir of a dead Mafia line. But the car kept moving, and no one asked what she believed. Lucia tried to name herself in the only terms that still made sense. She was a cleaner, a sister. A woman with bills and aching feet and a brother who needed care more than legends. Russo rejected that version of her with quiet certainty. He spoke of her future as if he had already seen it, written somewhere she could not reach. The estate he brought her to was hidden deep in forest, guarded by stone walls and men with weapons held low but ready. It looked safe in the way a vault looks safe. Nothing could get in easily. Nothing could get out easily either. Salvatore became the reason for every locked door, every guarded hall, every decision made without her. Captivity sounded less brutal when Russo called it protection, but the walls did not care what word he used. The moment Lucia heard Matteo had already been moved, fear turned into fury. She pushed past Marco, demanding to see him, her voice raw in a house built for quiet obedience. They led her to a room arranged with disturbing precision. Medical equipment, familiar medication, his favorite blanket, even the worn bear from childhood. Matteo slept under careful supervision, sedated with medicine he already used, Sophie explained. Her voice was warm, motherly, almost convincing. That made it worse. Every answer had been prepared before Lucia asked the question. Every possible resistance had a softer explanation waiting. Her anger had nowhere clean to land. She wanted to fight, but Matteo's breathing was steady, his color better than it had been in weeks. The room looked like care. The locked estate around it still felt like capture. That night, Lucia sat beside Matteo and watched the machines blink in the dark. Against her own judgment, a thought slipped in. Maybe Russo understood cages, because he had been born inside one too. It was dangerous to imagine him that way. But the mind does strange things when fear has no exit. Then a tiny red light blinked near the ceiling vent. Lucia went still. A camera, not hidden carelessly, but placed where it could see the bed, the chair, her face when she cried. Suddenly the warmth of the room changed. She stood on a chair and covered the lens with a folded cloth. Less than a minute later, Marco appeared at the door. No one had to explain what that meant. In the morning, Lucia confronted Sophia. Were they prisoners? Sophia did not flinch, and poured tea as if language could change the locks on the doors. Lucia asked about the camera. Sophia's hand paused only briefly before she said it was for medical monitoring. The lie was too smooth, too ready. Then she softened her voice and told Lucia that she had her grandmother's eyes, her grandmother's spirit, her grandmother's fire. The words landed in a tender place, and Lucia hated that they still worked. She had grown up with so little family history that even a stranger's claim felt like water to someone thirsty. Left alone afterward, she looked at her reflection and struggled to recognize herself. Her life had been seized, renamed, and handed back to her as destiny. By the window, moonlight silvered the trees beyond the estate walls, and Lucia caught herself thinking the most frightening thing yet. Maybe she belonged here. She hated the thought the moment it appeared, but she could not make it vanish. Belonging had always been scarce in her life. Poverty makes people feel temporary, always one bill away from losing even the little they have. Here, everything was fixed, solid, guarded, prepared. Even her captivity had structure. When she woke later in silk pajamas, she did not remember putting on. Shame and fear moved through her in a slow wave. Someone had chosen for her while she slept. Someone had handled the details of her body, her room, her life. Luxury did not erase the violation. It only made it harder to explain why she felt unsafe. Comfort became Russo's quietest weapon. Breakfast arrived warm and perfect. Clothes fit her body as if someone had measured her in secret. Matteo's doctor spoke with a confidence Lucia had spent years begging hospitals to show. Every need was met before she could ask, and that frightened her because part of her felt relieved. Then she found the second twist folded beneath the breakfast tray. A photograph of her old apartment door, taken in the night, marked with a black Catalano crest. No note, no explanation, just proof that someone outside the estate knew where she had lived. When Russo entered, she threw the photo at him. He did not look surprised. "Now you understand," he said. Lucia hated him for using terror so well. She hated the worst part, too. It worked. Lucia found Matteo in the garden the next morning, sitting on a stone bench like a boy in a storybook, instead of a hostage in a guarded estate. Sunlight touched the koi pond. Armed men stood far enough away to pretend they were not listening. Matteo looked better, And that was the cruelest part. His pain was managed. His breathing came easier. He even smiled when he saw her. Lucia wanted him angry, afraid, ready to run. Instead, he shrugged and said the doctors were better here. His young mind, exhausted by illness, had adapted faster than hers. To someone who had spent years being failed by the outside world, captivity with competent care could feel almost like mercy. Lucia sat beside him and felt the estate win a small, terrible victory. Matteo tried to make light of it because humor had always been his way of standing between himself and terror. Armed guards, he said, were at least visible. The enemy outside the walls was not. And captors were still captors. But even as she said it, she understood the weakness in her argument. Their old life had been free only in theory. In practice, it had been hospitals, debt collectors, empty refrigerators, as in Lucia working until her back ached. Sophia had already spoken to him, telling stories about their grandmother, feeding him warm soup, making the estate feel less like a prison and more like a place that had been waiting for them. Matteo was not foolish. He was tired, and tired people can mistake relief for trust. When Vincenzo joined them, he approached Matteo with careful restraint. No threats, no arrogance. He apologized for the disruption and spoke to the boy as if his fear mattered. Lucia watched Matteo respond to it, watched shame loosen in his shoulders when Russo promised he would not be a burden here. That word, burden, had lived between the siblings for years, though neither of them liked to touch it. Russo touched it without hesitation. He made himself look like the first powerful adult who could lift that weight. Then a staff member arrived to take Matteo for treatment, and Lucia was left alone with the man who had arranged everything. The separation was smooth, almost polite. No cage had slammed shut. Everyone had simply been guided into place. As Lucia followed Russo through the estate, she counted doors, corners, guards, windows, and possible exits. Her fear had become practical. The halls smelled of polish and old stone. Portraits watched from the walls, faces of people who had probably never asked permission to own anything. In the study, Russo stood behind a broad desk, his suit perfect, his expression unreadable. He asked how she had slept, as if they were hosts and guests, as if he had not uprooted her life in a single night. Lucia gave him a dry answer because sarcasm was the only weapon she could carry openly. His faint smile told her he enjoyed it. She sat on the edge of the chair, refusing to let the leather comfort her. He noticed that too. Russo opened a leather portfolio and turned Lucia's past into evidence. Birth certificates, old photographs, shipping records, names altered and reappearing under new spellings. He did not rush. He let each document land before showing the next, as if rebuilding her life brick by brick in front of her. And he slid a photograph across the desk. Sicily, 1989. Lucia saw her grandmother first, younger than she had ever imagined, standing proud as a woman whose smile made her chest ache. Her mother, alive in the picture, vibrant and laughing, before illness and exhaustion had hollowed out the last years Lucia remembered. The sight weakened her in a way threats could not. Russo had found the empty rooms in her memory and filled them with proof only he possessed. He told the story of Antonio Marino with a calm that made the violence feel official. Her grandfather's advisor had been accused of treason. The Catalano family had used the accusation to seize territory, burn homes, and erase witnesses. 23 Marino relatives died in one night. Lucia stared at the photograph until the edges blurred. Her mother had carried all that silence into America and never told her. Or maybe she had tried and run out of time. Russo did not soften the facts, but he watched Lucia closely as he spoke, measuring which wound opened deepest. Grief made her easier to reach. She hated that he knew it. She hated even more that, in that moment, she wanted him to keep talking. The person who frightened her most had become the only bridge to the dead. When Lucia asked how anyone survived, Russo leaned closer, lowering his voice. His father, he said, had secretly helped the remaining Marinos escape. False papers, a hidden route, enough money to vanish. That one detail changed the shape of the room. The Russo name was no longer only the name of her captor. It had become attached to rescue, to a debt buried before she was born. Lucia knew how convenient that sounded, yet the documents on the desk made doubt difficult. Russo then opened a map of old Sicilian territories, marked in faded ink and newer annotations. He showed her where Catalano power had grown from stolen ground. Then he showed her what could return to the Marino line if her blood was recognized. The fortress around her began to look, against her will, like the only safe place left. Lucia rejected it at first with everything she had. She would sign papers, disappear, give up whatever imaginary claim these men thought she had. She paced the study, throwing out solutions that would have made sense in a normal life, and the sound cut through every fragile plan. Salvatore's men had watched her apartment all night, he said. Her agency had been contacted. Her old routes, her neighbors, even Matteo's clinic were known. One by one, he removed every place she thought she could return to. Lucia stopped pacing. You made the outside world unsafe, so I would thank you for walls. Russo's eyes darkened. No, Lucia, I found the wolves at your door, before you heard them breathing. The finality of it drained her. Lucia sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Russo poured whiskey and pushed the glass toward her, a small comfort offered after he had stripped away every clean choice. She almost refused, then took it because her hands needed something to hold. He spoke of options, but each one remained inside the world he controlled. Stay hidden under his protection, claim the Marino legacy under his guidance, run and likely be killed. Those were not choices. They were hallways in the same house. Yet, as the whiskey burned her throat, the impossible began to organize itself into something she could survive. Terror had become too large to carry shapeless. Even a maze felt better when someone handed her a map. Russo did not offer Lucia a return to simplicity. He offered elevation. He spoke of authority as if it had been waiting in her blood, buried under cheap uniforms and unpaid bills. He told her she had carried dignity, even while serving people who never looked at her twice. The words should have sounded like flattery. They did. But they also touched a hunger Lucia rarely admitted. She was tired of asking, tired of begging hospitals for extensions, tired of being invisible until someone needed a floor cleaned. Russo gave that pain a new name power denied. In his mouth, her suffering became proof she was meant for more. The idea was dangerous because it did not feel false. Helplessness had exhausted her, and power even offered by the wrong man looked like air. Lucia set down the glass and asked for time with Matteo. Russo granted it, and the simple permission felt bigger than it should have. He had taken so much control that even a small yes sounded like mercy. Before she left, he moved into her space and lowered his voice. You are under my protection now. The words were almost gentle. She wanted to believe in the gentleness, because the alternative was too bleak. But protection that requires permission to move, speak, and know the truth is not safety. It is possession with softer language. And when I stop needing your protection, she asked. Russo held her gaze. Then we will discover whether you still want me beside you. The answer stayed with her longer than it should have. The mention of Salvatore Catalano changed Russo instantly. Whatever softness had appeared vanished behind command. He ordered a meeting for 8 that evening, sent Marco to tighten the perimeter, and spoke in the clipped rhythm of a man returning to war. Lucia watched the transformation and felt both alarmed and oddly reassured. This was the man everyone feared. This was also the man standing between her and another predator. When she asked what he planned to tell Catalano, Russo looked toward the darkening windows. Fear of the unknown is a powerful weapon, he said. It was not a boast. It was a principle he lived by. Lucia realized then that he did not survive because he was the strongest man in every room. He survived because he knew how to make others imagine worse than he had shown. Before sending her away, Russo gave her one more hook. Her grandmother's lullabies, he said, might contain coded coordinates tied to hidden evidence of the Catalano betrayal. The song Lucia had used to comfort herself became something else entirely. A map, a warning, an inheritance. She left the study, with her thoughts split down the middle. One side wanted to hide, take Matteo and run until her lungs failed. The other side, quieter but growing, wondered what it would mean if her family's pain could be turned into power. Russo had not created that thought. He had found it and fed it. As she walked past guards and old portraits, Lucia understood the worst truth about temptation. It does not feel foreign. It feels like something inside you finally being given permission to speak. Meanwhile, Matteo was being drawn in through a different door. Russo's garage looked like a museum for speed and money. Sleek bodies of steel and glass, engines polished like jewels. A world of freedom built by men who owned roads instead of walking them. Matteo's eyes lit up despite himself. He had spent too much of his life in hospital rooms, watching other boys grow strong while he measured good days by how little pain he felt. When a driver promised a closed course once his doctors approved, Matteo laughed with a brightness Lucia had not heard in months. She should have been happy. Instead, dread settled in her stomach. Russo had found her brother's hunger too, not just for medicine, but for strength, risk, and the feeling of being alive. Lucia pulled Matteo away to the koi pond, hoping open air might clear the spell. But even the garden belonged to Russo. The walls were high, the forest pressed close. Guards stood at careful distances, pretending privacy while ensuring none existed. Matteo joked about being Mafia royalty, but when Lucia showed him the photograph of their mother and grandmother, his smile faded. She told him about Salvatore, the Marino bloodline, the deaths, and the men outside who might want them erased. For the first time, the fantasy lost its shine. Wealth was not a prize here. It was the surface of something old and violent. Matteo looked back toward the house, where doctors, food, and safety waited, then toward the walls that made escape impossible. His face changed. He finally understood they were not guests in a mystery. They were targets in a war. Matteo's answer hurt because it came from love, not want to run. Running to him meant Lucia going back to double shifts, unpaid bills, and nights crying quietly over insurance letters. It meant their mother had hidden everything, for nothing. It meant he would remain the sick younger brother everyone sacrificed for. This violent inheritance offered him something illness never had: usefulness. A way to stand beside Lucia instead of being carried by her. He admitted he was afraid, but fear of dying in a bed had lived with him longer than fear of men with guns. At least this enemy has a face, he said. Lucia wanted to argue. Instead, she saw the shame behind his courage. Danger had become his first chance to matter. Then Matteo said the thing Lucia least wanted to hear. Russo watched her differently. Not like staff, not even like a pawn. Like she had reached some place in him no one else could. Lucia snapped that this was not a romance. Matteo did not argue. He only said dangerous people could still be changed by the right person. The words were naive, but they slipped into a crack already forming inside her. The idea that she might bring out something human in Vincenzo was absurd, and yet tempting. It gave her fear a purpose. It made her captivity feel less humiliating. Alone later in the garden, Lucia hated how much she wanted that version to be true. A love story, even a false one, was easier to breathe inside than the thought of being owned. Rain gathered over the estate by afternoon. Lucia retreated to the music room, where a grand piano waited beneath tall windows, streaked with gray light, hunting for meaning in notes she had known since childhood. If the song held coordinates, then her grandmother had hidden fear inside tenderness. Halfway through the melody, a phone on a side table began to ring. It was not hers. The screen showed no name, only an international number. Lucia almost ignored it, then answered. Salvatore's voice came through low and amused. Ask Russo what happened to the first Marino girl he protected. Behind his voice, someone cried out once, sharp and quickly silenced. The line died before Lucia could breathe. When Vincenzo entered seconds later, she knew by his face that he had heard enough. Russo sat beside her on the piano bench, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers. The room felt smaller around them. Lucia demanded to know who the first Marino girl was. For once, his answer did not come easily. Her name had been Alessia, he said, a cousin hidden years ago and found and killed before his father could move her out of Sicily. Salvatore had used the story like a blade because it was true. Lucia felt the estate tilt around her. Safety was not guaranteed here. Protection could fail. Russo covered her hand on the keys, but this time she pulled free. Do not touch me until you finish telling the truth. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded. That small obedience shook her more than another command would have. Russo told her the rest without softening it. Alessia had trusted the wrong servant. A message had been intercepted. The Marino line had lost another daughter. Lucia listened to the rain strike the windows and imagined a girl like her waiting for rescue that came too late. The story broke the spell of destiny for a moment. This was not romance. Not legacy, not a hidden crown waiting to be claimed. This was a graveyard with paperwork. Russo watched her absorb it and did not reach for her again. Why tell me now? She asked. His voice dropped. Because fear you understand can be survived. Fear hidden from you becomes a leash. Lucia almost laughed at the hypocrisy, but part of her heard the warning inside the confession. Then Russo used the name that always reached her fastest. Matteo. Salvatore would not hesitate to use him, he said. Illness made the boy vulnerable. Love made Lucia predictable. The words were cruel because they were true. She thought of Matteo in the garden, smiling at cars, daring himself to want a future. Facing Salvatore alone suddenly felt impossible. Facing him beside Vincenzo felt less impossible. And that frightened her most. She turned on him. You keep saying beside you, but every road leads where you want. Russo stepped closer but did not touch her. Then choose a road and make me follow. The line should have sounded impossible. Instead, it lit something inside her. Not trust, not love, something sharper. The desire to stop being moved like a piece on someone else's board. Russo lowered his guard again carefully, like a man revealing a blade hilt first. He spoke of a childhood without softness, of a mother gone too soon, of a father who taught him that love was only another point of weakness for enemies to attack. Lucia listened even as the rational part of her warned against every word. He said her defiance disturbed him. Her songs had pulled memories out of places he kept locked. In another mouth, it might have sounded romantic. In his, it sounded like obsession learning to wear gentleness. Yet Lucia felt the pull. She had spent years being needed, rarely wanted. Russo made wanting feel intense, dangerous, almost sacred. He had chosen the moment well. She was angry enough to want power and wounded enough to want tenderness. When Lucia challenged him, asking whether he wanted a partner or a prisoner, Russo did not answer directly. He called her a force. He said she had survived poverty, grief, and fear without letting them make her small. The words landed before she could defend herself from them. For one suspended second, the storm outside faded, and all she felt was the heat of his attention. He could make control feel like recognition. She almost stepped closer. Then Marco entered with a message, and Russo's face changed so fast it startled her. Inches from confession became command again. Clean, cold, strategic. Lucia saw it and understood something important. Whatever he felt, he could put it away whenever power required him to. Dinner that night was quieter than Lucia expected. Russo did not perform cruelty. He let Matteo ask too many questions, even smiled once at the boy's nervous joke. He made space for Sophia's food, for doctor's updates, for normal conversation, pretending to live among armed guards. Lucia watched her brother relax by inches, and each inch frightened her. After years of emergency rooms and exhaustion, this table looked like rescue. And Matteo mentioned something Sophia had said. Their mother had visited the Russo estate once before Lucia was born. The table went still. Sophia's face lost color. Russo looked at her very slowly. Lucia felt the room tighten, and this one did not come from an enemy outside the gates. Russo dismissed Matteo gently and sent Sophia from the room with a look that promised consequences later. Lucia refused to let him bury it. "My mother was here," she asked. He admitted that Rosalia Marino had come to his father years ago, begging for help after receiving threats from Catalano loyalists. She had refused protection because she wanted her children to live outside all of it. Lucia felt the words like a second abandonment. Her mother had chosen distance, silence, ordinary suffering, anything but this world. Russo had known that, and still dragged Lucia back into it. When she accused him of betraying her mother's wish, he did not deny it. "Your mother chose peace," he said. "Salvatore chose war. I am answering the man still alive." Later, Russo surprised her by offering the one thing she expected least, a way out. He said if she truly wanted to leave, he could arrange safe passage, money, new identities, medical care for Matteo. Lucia looked for the trap and found it in the smoothness of his voice. He made leaving sound possible, but every word reminded her of what she would lose: protection, answers, her family's truth. The first chance at real security Matteo had ever had. Manipulating her, he did not deny it. He only said power is always manipulation. The difference is whether one uses it with purpose. It was a terrible answer. It was also honest enough to confuse her. Making the cage look voluntary, he made Sting feel like strength instead of surrender. During the night storm, Lucia lay awake and listened to rain strike the windows. The estate creaked like an old ship. Somewhere beyond the walls, men loyal to Catalano might already be waiting. Somewhere inside the house, Russo's guards walked their quiet routes. She told herself she was choosing, not yielding. The sentence repeated until it almost sounded true. By morning, the DNA test turned the uncertainty physical. Swabs from her and Matteo were sealed under Russo's supervision and sent under armed escort. He spoke as if the results were a formality, because he needed the story stable before science confirmed it. Lucia watched the envelope leave and felt a strange grief. Proof would not only reveal who she was, it would bury the last version of herself that could pretend this was all a mistake. They walked the autumn grounds, while Russo explained what recognition would mean. Formal announcements meant negotiation with old families, a treaty if Salvatore could be forced into one. Then, almost quietly, he introduced the idea of a marital alliance. Lucia stopped walking. Marriage in his world was not romance first. It was signal, shield, contract, weapon. Russo did not pretend otherwise. He promised Matteo lifelong medical care, private specialists, education, safety. He placed every need Lucia had ever bled for into the center of the offer. That was why it worked, not because she was foolish. Because he understood the richest currency for someone who has lived in fear is not diamonds, it is certainty. Offer enough safety to a frightened person, and the walls can rise around them before they call it a cage. Lucia did not say yes at once. That mattered to her. She needed conditions, boundaries, proof that some part of her still belonged to herself. Matteo would remain safe. She would learn the business, not stand beside Russo as decoration. She would have access to the records, the history, the accounts, the truth. Russo agreed too easily. His willingness should have warned her, but instead it felt like respect. "And if I refuse the marriage?" she asked. He looked at her without blinking. "Then I protect you anyway." It was exactly the answer she wanted, and exactly the answer designed to make refusal harder. A small boundary granted at the right time can make a much larger surrender feel earned. For a few minutes, there was peace. Russo told her they had time. Nothing had to be forced. The words softened the air between them. Then Marco's voice cut through the illusion. 6 vehicles had breached the outer perimeter, heavily armed, Catalano's men. At the same time, a kitchen assistant named Elena was exposed as an informant. The estate shifted instantly from luxury to war machine. Doors locked. Guards moved. Sofia vanished with Matteo's medical team. Lucia felt the old fear rise, but this time it did not push her away from Russo. It pulled her closer. External danger made his violence feel useful. The man who had trapped her now stood between her and the men coming to kill her. Russo drew his weapon with the ease of a man reaching for a pen. His face emptied of everything but calculation. Lucia should have recoiled. Instead, fear shot through her for him. Not because he was innocent, but because he had become part of her survival map. Marco pulled her back as alarm spread through the halls, and she looked over her shoulder at Russo, directing men into position. The cold efficiency that should have horrified her now seemed like strength. A bullet struck one of the tall windows, exploding glass across the corridor. Russo shoved Lucia behind a pillar before she even heard the shot. His body covered hers for half a second, and he was gone again, weapon raised. The gesture branded itself into her memory more deeply than any promise. Marco led Lucia through a hidden passage behind paneled walls, down a narrow staircase and into a reinforced bunker beneath the estate. Matteo was already there, pale and shaking. Wrapped in a blanket he clutched with both hands. Steel doors sealed behind them. Security screens lit the concrete room with blue light. Above them the estate became distant, gunfire flashes, moving figures, shouted orders reduced to grainy images. Then one monitor flickered. Salvatore's face appeared in the static. Behind him, Elena knelt on a marble floor, bruised, terrified, still wearing the kitchen apron Lucia had seen that morning. "Tell the Marino girl," Salvatore said. Her mother ran from the right man, and the screen went black as Elena screamed. The bunker fell silent except for Matteo's shaking breath. Near the monitors, his face tight with anger and helplessness. No one said Elena's name. No one had to. Lucia stared at the dead screen and felt something colder than fear move through her. This was not a distant family feud anymore. Salvatore had reached through steel doors and shown her exactly what mercy looked like to him. Not let them decide who Mom died protecting. The sentence cut through the bunker noise. Lucia looked at her brother, then back at the blank monitor. Her old life had taught her to endure. New World was teaching her that endurance alone would not keep anyone alive. Something changed in Lucia as she watched Russo command the defense from the screens. Hiding no longer felt like safety. It felt like being erased while others decided what her name meant. She stood up and demanded to go upstairs. Carlos refused. Matteo begged her to be careful, but he did not tell her to stop. Lucia heard her own voice growing steadier, colder, almost unfamiliar. Salvatore had come for the Marino heir. If she remained invisible, she would only be a rumor men killed each other over. If she appeared, she could become a problem they had to face. The thought frightened her, but it also filled her with a dark energy she had never known. The captive was learning the language of the captor, not because she was free, but because power felt better than helplessness. Lucia's transformation was no longer hidden inside thought. It had reached her voice. She spoke of perception, bloodline, leverage, and timing, as if those words had always belonged to her. Matteo looked at her with fear. Not of the men outside, but of the sister standing before him. She saw it and almost stopped. Then the lights flickered, and another round of gunfire rolled through the ceiling. The world did not give her time to remain gentle. The woman who had once tried to disappear in rich people's houses now wanted to be seen by men with guns. She was not simply obeying Russo. She was adapting to his world, learning its rules, and finding pieces of herself that responded to them. Innocence did not vanish all at once. It retreated each time survival rewarded something darker. Carlos finally took her upstairs through a service corridor, cursing under his breath the whole way. Sirens wailed through the walls. Somewhere nearby, something shattered. Lucia's pulse pounded so hard she felt it in her teeth. They entered a secondary command center, a fortified room filled with monitors, radios, and men moving around Russo's orders. Vincenzo stood in the center of it, controlled fury burning beneath a face carved almost still. When he saw Lucia, anger flashed before concern. Not because she was safe, because she had moved without permission. That reaction told her exactly where she stood. Even now, even in war, he expected to manage her. She had come upstairs to claim power and found the first person she had to confront was the man who had taught her to want it. Russo demanded to know why she was there. Lucia answered before fear could stop her. This was her bloodline. Her war too. The room went quiet enough for every radio crackle to sound sharp. For the first time, she was not pleading, not bargaining, not asking what came next. She was stating it. Russo's anger cooled into something more complicated. Pride, perhaps. Calculation, certainly. He saw that her reckless courage could be useful, but he did not simply step aside. He set conditions. She would obey his signals. She would not move unless told. She would not mistake bravery for command. And do not mistake my survival for obedience. Several men looked away. Russo did not smile, but something in his eyes changed. Then Salvatore's voice filled the room through the audio feed. Old, rough, amused, unfinished family business. A phrase so cold it made her skin tighten. He was not speaking to a woman. He was speaking to a bloodline he had failed to erase. Russo moved as if to answer, but Lucia stepped forward first. Her own calm surprised her. She addressed Salvatore by name and refused to let him speak around her. The silence on the line lasted just long enough to tell her she had unsettled him. She was terrified, but fear had sharpened into focus. Salvatore expected tears, confusion, a sheltered girl dragged into a man's war. What he heard instead was a voice steady enough to make him wonder what else he did not know. Salvatore tried to make her small. A pawn, he called her. A frightened maid playing at royalty. Lucia looked at the monitors, at the men risking their lives above and below ground, at Russo, standing beside her with restrained violence in every line of his body. Then she turned the insult back on him. Pawns become queens when no one notices them crossing the board. The words landed. She felt it in the pause that followed. Then she bluffed. If she died, evidence of Catalano crimes would be released automatically to prosecutors, journalists, and rival families. No such complete file existed yet, but Salvatore did not know that. Criminal empires survive on paranoia. Lucia spoke with enough certainty to make uncertainty itself become a weapon. Her gamble grew sharper. Posed a face-to-face meeting. Not because she trusted him, but because curiosity can hold a violent man still longer than fear can. Russo grabbed her arm the moment the call ended. His grip was hard, his eyes bright with anger and something close to panic. She had moved outside his plan. The puppet had found her own strings. Lucia met his stare and told him Salvatore was afraid now. Not of her strength, but of the unknown around her. Russo did not release her at once. He studied her like he was seeing the result of his own work and wondering whether it had grown beyond him. Lucia should have felt ashamed of the thrill moving through her. Instead, she felt awake. From that point forward, Lucia changed quickly because crisis gave her no time to be gentle with herself. She began calling it natural authority. But beneath the phrase was fear forced into armor. Russo watched with predatory interest and genuine surprise as she absorbed the posture of power. Fewer words, steadier eyes, no apology before a demand. Salvatore tried to shake her by mocking her past, reminding her she had cleaned toilets for the same class of people, now pretending to respect her. Lucia did not flinch. Poverty had humiliated her for years. Now she turned it into proof. Knew how servants moved through rooms unnoticed, and they forgot the help was listening. The shame he threw at her became information, and information became a blade. Lucia offered Salvatore a retreat he could survive. That was what impressed the room. She did not simply threaten. She understood ego. Men like Catalano did not need mercy. They needed a way to step back while pretending they had chosen it. She proposed verification, temporary ceasefire, DNA confirmation, and the return of specific Merino assets if her claim proved true. Russo stood beside her, silent for once, letting her voice carry the danger. When Salvatore mocked her again, she answered with the calm of someone who had spent a lifetime swallowing insults and had finally found a use for them. "You should fear servants," she said. "We know which doors you leave unlocked." No one in the command room breathed for 3 seconds. Her demands became bolder: recognition, revenue share, access to old properties, public acknowledgement before the families that the Marino line had not died. Salvatore accused Russo of teaching her every word. Russo answered with a faint smile and said, "Blood has a way of remembering." Lucia knew the line was theatrical. She also knew theater mattered in rooms ruled by symbols. She laid out the cost of refusal, public exposure, rival claims, a war that would make Salvatore look weak before younger men already waiting for him to stumble. She did not need to defeat him that night. She only needed to make immediate violence feel expensive. By the time the call ended, everyone in the command room understood she had not won the war, but she had bought time, and time was power. The meeting that followed 2 days later was staged with the precision of a funeral. Neutral ground. Armed men kept outside. Lawyers, DNA observers, old representatives, each pretending the law mattered more than the weapons beyond the doors. Salvatore arrived with a small velvet box and placed it in front of Lucia. Inside was a child's silver bracelet, blackened by fire. "Alessia's," he said, smiling as if offering a family heirloom. Russo's men shifted, ready to draw. Lucia did not move. Salvatore wanted horror. He wanted tears. Instead, she closed the box and pushed it back to him. "Keep it," she said. "You will need proof of the children you failed to erase." For the first time, Salvatore's smile thinned. When the DNA results arrived, they did more than confirm blood. They gave Lucia permission to let the old version of herself fade. The documents named her Marino. The observers accepted it. Even Salvatore's people stopped speaking as if she were a mistake, and his expression held the satisfaction of a man seeing a long plan take shape. He called her transformation destiny. Lucia wanted to believe that word because destiny felt nobler than manipulation. It made the fear meaningful. It made the losses part of a design. Around the estate, security sweeps continued. Staff were questioned, and hidden loyalties were cut away. Lucia noticed how quickly she accepted it all. Power changed the room first. Then it changed what she could tolerate. Russo's language shifted after that. Less captor, more partner. He spoke of kindred spirits, shared burdens, and a future built from 2 damaged bloodlines refusing to disappear. The speed of it should have alarmed Lucia. Instead, it soothed the conflict inside her. If this was fate, then she had not been taken. She had been found. If Russo was her equal, then his control could be mistaken for devotion. She began describing their bond as inevitable, because inevitability quieted questions choice could not answer. Their hands touched during meetings. His approval came in small looks no one else would notice. Each one strengthened the new story. A powerful man had seen her, chosen her, protected her, and placed a crown where the world had placed a mop. It was intoxicating, because it answered wounds she had never named. 6 months later, Sicily glowed under evening lights. Lucia stood on a villa balcony, wearing the sapphire necklace that had once felt like a collar. Now she touched it as if it were part of her skin. Matteo's doctors worked nearby in a private wing. The Marino properties were being restored. Men who would once have ignored her now waited for her opinion. On paper, everything looked like victory. Lucia had safety, wealth, influence, and a man who watched her as if the world narrowed when she entered a room. But victory can be complicated when it grows from captivity. She had not escaped Russo's world. She had become fluent in it. The frightening part was not that she suffered there. The frightening part was that she often felt alive there. Matteo asked her one evening whether she was truly happy. He did not accuse her. That made the question harder. Lucia looked across the terrace at armed guards posted among lemon trees, at guests discussing alliances over wine, at Russo speaking quietly with men who feared him. None of it startled her anymore. A year earlier, this life would have looked like danger wearing silk. Now it felt like rhythm, purpose, even home. She told Matteo she was happy, and she meant it. Then her eyes moved, almost by habit, to the nearest exit, the side gate, the guard by the stairs. Matteo saw it. "Then why do you still check the exits?" he asked. Lucia touched the sapphire at her throat. For a moment, she looked almost frightened by her own silence. That night, Lucia walked beside Vincenzo toward the hall, where their engagement would be announced. His hand rested at her back, light enough to seem tender, firm enough to remind her of the first ballroom, where everyone learned she was his. She told herself the meaning had changed. Maybe it had. Maybe she had changed enough to need the old warning less. Russo leaned close and praised her strength the same way he had done from the beginning, more like a ritual. At the doorway, Matteo watched her from across the corridor. Lucia's fingers rose again to the sapphire necklace, not pulling it away, not loosening it, but holding it like a vow. For one brief second, Matteo saw his sister clearly, beautiful, powerful, untouchable, and farther away than any locked room could have put her. The doors opened, and applause rolled toward Lucia like warm weather. Vincenzo guided her forward, but she did not stumble, did not hesitate, did not look back. Matteo waited for the old signal between them, the small glance she used to give whenever she was scared and pretending not to be. It never came. She smiled at the families, at the men who had once hunted her name, at the man who had turned captivity into a throne. Her victory song was real to her, so was the cage beneath it. The human mind can survive almost anything if it learns to rename the pain. And as Matteo watched his sister stand beside Vincenzo Russo, wearing the sapphire like a crown, he understood the coldest part of all. Lucia had not failed to escape. She had stopped wanting the door. Every mafia boss story is not only about power, money, revenge, or fear. Beneath the violence and darkness, there is often a painful human lesson about choices, consequences, loyalty, family, and the price of ambition. This story reminds us that no matter how powerful a person becomes, no one can escape the truth forever. Hundreds of people, and make others tremble at the sound of his name. But if his heart is empty, his victory is never complete. The mafia boss in this story represents a man who built his life on control. He believed that fear was stronger than love, that silence was safer than honesty, and that power could protect him from pain. For years, he may have won every battle in the streets, in business, and among his enemies. But the most important battle was never outside him. It was inside his own heart. That is where he truly lost himself. One of the most meaningful lessons from this story is that power without morality becomes a prison. Many people dream of becoming rich, respected, or feared. They think success means having control over others. But real success is not measured by how many people obey you. It is measured by how many lives you protect, how much peace you create, and how much good remains after you are gone. The mafia boss had money, influence, and protection, but he did not have peace. His life shows us that a person can be surrounded by luxury and still feel completely alone. Another important lesson is that loyalty is valuable, but blind loyalty can destroy lives. In the world of crime, loyalty is often treated like the highest law. People are expected to follow orders without question. Never mean giving up your conscience. A loyal person does not simply protect someone's secrets. A loyal person also has the courage to stop someone from destroying themselves. This story teaches us that loyalty without honesty is dangerous. Real loyalty should be connected to truth, respect, and moral responsibility. The story also shows the heavy cost of revenge. Revenge often feels powerful in the beginning. It gives a person the illusion that pain can be answered with pain, but revenge rarely heals anything. Instead, it creates a chain of suffering that keeps growing. One act of revenge leads to another. One betrayal leads to another. In the end, everyone loses something. The mafia boss may have believed that revenge would restore his honor, but what it truly did was steal his humanity piece by piece. This is a powerful reminder that forgiveness is not weakness. Sometimes, forgiveness is the strongest decision a person can make because it breaks the cycle of hatred. Family is another central lesson in this kind of story. Many mafia bosses claim they do everything for family. They say they commit crimes to protect the people they love. But protection without honesty can become another form of harm. A family does not only need money or security. A family needs trust, emotional safety, and love that is not poisoned by fear. If a father, husband, brother, or son becomes powerful but loses the ability to show tenderness, then his family may live in a beautiful house, but still feel trapped inside it. This story reminds us that children and loved ones often pay the price for the choices of powerful men. The mafia boss may think his decisions only affect his enemies, but every secret, every violent act, and every betrayal leaves a shadow over the innocent people around him. That is why one of the strongest educational messages is this: before making a decision, we must ask ourselves who will suffer because of it. A selfish choice may bring temporary success, but it can create long-term pain for the people we love most. Another meaningful point is the danger of pride. Pride can make a person refuse to apologize, refuse to change, and refuse to admit they are wrong. The mafia boss may have spent years believing that saying sorry would make him look weak, but in reality, the ability to apologize is a sign of strength. It takes courage to face the damage we have caused. It takes maturity to admit that we hurt someone, and it takes true character to change before it is too late. The story also teaches that redemption is possible, but it always requires sacrifice. A person cannot simply say they have changed. They must prove it through action. Redemption means accepting responsibility, protecting the innocent, telling the truth, and sometimes losing everything that was built on lies. For a mafia boss, redemption may mean walking away from power, exposing corruption, saving someone he once endangered, or choosing love over control. The path to redemption is painful because it forces a person to confront the worst parts of themselves, but it is also the only path that can lead to peace. From a human perspective, this story is powerful because it shows that even the hardest heart can still feel pain. Behind the cold eyes of a mafia boss, there may be regret, loneliness, childhood wounds, or a deep fear of being betrayed. This does not excuse his actions, but it helps us understand that broken people often break others when they never learn how to heal. The educational value here is important. Pain should not become an excuse to hurt people. Instead, pain should become a reason to grow, to seek wisdom, and to choose a better path. For viewers, the lesson is not to admire the criminal lifestyle, but to understand its emptiness. The suits, cars, mansions, and power may look attractive from the outside, but behind them there is often fear, guilt, and loss. A life built on violence can never bring true happiness. A life built on lies can never bring true freedom. And a life built on fear can never create real love. In the end, the story of a mafia boss is really a warning. It warns us that every choice has a consequence. It warns us that money cannot buy peace. It warns us that fear cannot replace respect. It warns us that revenge cannot heal a wounded heart. Most importantly, it reminds us that the greatest power a person can have is not the power to control others, but the power to control themselves. The deepest lesson is simple but meaningful. Choose character over pride, love over control, truth over silence, and forgiveness over revenge. No matter how dark a person's past may be, change is possible when they are willing to face the truth. But the longer someone waits, the higher the price becomes. A mafia boss may win the streets, defeat his enemies, and build an empire, but if he loses his soul, he has lost everything. True strength is not found in violence. True strength is found in responsibility, compassion, humility, and the courage to become better before it is too late.